Hello. So in this game, there's quite a bit to discuss about statics and dynamics, and basically the point is when we have static advantages, we want to avoid dynamics as much as possible to not allow the opponent to get back into the game. So this was a very good example. You won a pawn. Well, he kind of sacrificed the pawn, and you got the pawn quite early on. And later he started, well, he didn't really do anything, but you allowed him to get all kinds of dynamic counterplay instead of minimizing it. So let's take a look. And there were a few instances of this. So we have the French. There is this kind of gambit, queen a5. Not familiar with this line, but this is possible apparently. Knight c6 is maybe more natural. So bishop d3, bishop d7, trying to exchange the bad bishop is usually a good idea in the French. So we're of course using quite a lot of time here, moving around the same piece twice, moving many pawns and the queen, which of course we have to understand is risky, but as long as white is not able to do anything with that, and as long as we are up a pawn, this should be fine. So he plays a3, we take, and knight c6. Now black has to develop the pieces as quickly as possible, and once he gets developed, for example like this, once he gets fully developed, right, we must understand that the position is just winning for black, right, because he has a pawn and there is no compensation for white. The only compensation for white is very short term, and it is the lead in development. So we take knight c3. Also, this wasn't really necessary as this wasn't a threat because we could just take back. So we can use this opportunity to develop a piece, for example, the rook. We don't want to go here because this would block our bishop taking on b4. So rook c8 now will ask white what he's doing next. And if he takes, we will just develop a bishop. This is pinned. If he wants to defend the rook, we will go back. Now the knight can go out here. And again, black's only goal is to finish development, and as usual, when we win a pawn, the first step is stability. The first step is to stabilize as soon as possible, and then start exchanging pieces and planning something. Okay, now knight h6. And this is the problem. Here, black has a simple way to get developed without much opposition. Of course, white will try to get some kind of compensation on the queen side, but we must get developed as quickly as possible. And the problem with this is that this allows extra dynamic options for white. He can develop, well, kind of deploy his undeveloped bishop in one move, also ruining the structure. And now our king, this is the problem, our king will be unsafe wherever it goes, because, and especially in the center, right? So this is not very good for our king, and king safety is one dynamic factor which we will not be able to solve here. So already this gives white quite a bit of compensation for the pawn. Now the pawn doesn't matter, the king matters. While here, the king doesn't really matter because it is quite safe. And again, the knight can go either to f5 or g6, and then the bishop can go to e7. And so this should be quite fine. But now after knight h6, we have to go back, and he takes, and now we have some kind of problems on the king side. Okay, rook b1, rook b8, maybe a bit unnecessary, but okay, a6, and the bishop g7. This is another thing, this bishop is not really useful on this square, it is only defending the pawn on h6, but at this point we should consider giving up this pawn if it allows white to use a lot of tempi. For example, here, after queen e3, maybe we don't really care about this pawn too much, though castling is also not very appetizing. For example, we can play queen d8 to get the queen out into the game. If he wants to take, we can put the king on d7. Of course, this is quite ugly, but at this point, our king is not very safe wherever it goes. So bishop g7, rook b6, and castles. So now at least white is focusing on the king side. The queen side. He's not really looking here. And at the moment, we still have a pawn, and we have at least one good plan of putting the knight on c4. So for the moment, black is doing quite well. Knight d2, rook f8, g3. White is wasting time. And bishop f8. Now the bishop is back where it belongs. And knight d1. queen c7. So now black is kind of taking over again. White's last moves have not really achieved much, and we can start creating threats. For example, queen a4 simply threatens to take the pawn on a3. More importantly, it threatens to exchange queens, as if the queens are exchanged, our king's side safety is not very important anymore, and there's not that much to do for white, as in the endgame our king can also come help on c7, d7, moves like this. Okay, queen c7 and queen c2, but this doesn't really threaten much, and it allows this bad knight to get improved with tempo, and now the long-term king safety issues are apparent on the king side. Bishop g7, rook b4, kind of a strange move, but okay, queen a3. And at this point we have to understand that if nothing happens, then black is completely winning, right? Because he has two pawns, two connected passed pawns. So again, we must not allow any dynamics. And here you pointed out that after king h8, he calculated knight d7, but this is quite easy to refute, right? So yeah, if rook a8, then this is kind of a fork. Even this doesn't really hurt too much, as rook c1 is again possible, but here rook c1 exchanges the rooks, and we save this one, so we are quite fine. And again, now that we take here, this gives new dynamic possibilities to white. He has this very strong pawn, which is extremely annoying, and our king is even more unsafe at this point, and our bishop is gone. At the moment, queen g4 is threatened, so we must lose more time. So this should have been the main focus, probably, in this game, how to not take on f6. And I would argue even if we do lose the exchange here, we shouldn't really care too much. For example, if b5, this is possible, but now after knight c4, we can start pushing our pawn slowly. So this is also quite playable, even if we don't see rook c1, the bishop can go to f8 again. White has no active pieces, basically, so we are doing quite fine. Okay, bishop f6, and now king h8. And yeah, this was an interesting moment, as you mentioned. It's kind of wastes a tempo. We could, for example, try to double the rooks on the c file. One idea is to defend f7 as well, as the white knight is probably heading this way. So this was possible. And at this point, it was kind of a matter of time already. So here, after rook c1, king g2, now we kind of have to go back, so at least you understood this. And now with the king on g2, this is quite a bit better for white, suddenly. And also, white has now this very nice tactic of using the pin on this pawn with queen a6. And if black loses his pawns, then he has no long-term advantages, and it's starting to seem like he is going to lose the pawns. And with this weak king, with the weakness on f7, the weakness on b7, white is now winning. So knight e5 instead. Now b5, at least now b7 is not attacked. But after queen h5, we kind of have to make the draw. There's no move apart from rook f8 and the rook g8. And now we're lucky that the opponent didn't try to play for a win. But at this point, things have gone quite wrong. So of course, there were a few moments here, namely this taking on f6, right? And again, we must not allow dynamics if possible, and this would give new dynamic opportunities because our king will be even more weak. After king h8, yeah, this is a move, but if we calculate correctly, this is the only check in the position, right? So we should see it. Otherwise, knight h6 in general was kind of the start of all the problems. There was no reason to put a knight specifically on h6 to allow the bishop to take it. Of course, in a normal French, this isn't the end of the world, but now that we have a big static advantage in an extra pawn, we must not allow any dynamics, as any dynamics will favor white, especially when we're undeveloped. So we should just try to get developed as quickly and safely as possible. And once we've castled, all of our problems will basically disappear.